All right, what is going on here? Well, it appears that you still cannot see the video for this. I am not sure why the video isn't working. Let's try turning the camera back on and see if it'll figure itself out here. Let's see, turn camera on. Okie dokie. Still not going to show us anything here. Guys, I am very sorry for the technical difficulties that I am having today. I do not know what's up, and I am not technically savvy enough to figure out what is wrong when something like this happens. I prefer it to all work correctly. But we're just going to go with it, and I will talk to you. You can listen while you do whatever you'd like to do. I know for me, I don't usually actually watch people in webinars anyway. So we'll do it this way. Welcome to How to Help Your Child Bridge Their Learning Gaps. Today we're going to talk about recognizing if your child does have learning gaps, and then some steps that you can take to help them overcome that. First thing I want to talk about is, does your child have a learning gap? If your child is not performing at grade level, you may be thinking that he or she is behind. Behind implies that they are needing to do some catching up. Behind implies that they don't have the ability to succeed once they start working on this task. So they don't have the ability on their own to read or to figure out a math equation. But remember that this process of education is a marathon, not a sprint. So as adults, for example, do we consider ourselves behind in our career if we don't know the information that is pertaining to our daily lives? Or, I'm sorry, do we consider ourselves behind in our career if we don't know information that is not pertinent to our daily lives? For instance, I blog online. My husband does electrical work. He spends his entire day doing calculations, and I spend my entire day trying to figure out Google and researching educational theories. I would not have the slightest idea how to do what he does if I just were to walk in to an electrical site, and he wouldn't have the slightest idea what to do when he tried to come in here and take a look at what the stink was going on with my webinar streaming. But that doesn't mean that he is any less competent than I am, or that I'm any less competent than he is. It just means that we have chosen to learn specific information that pertains to what we do. And it doesn't mean that I'm not capable of learning what he does if the need ever arose. And the same thing with, him understanding what I do. If he studied it, if he's interested in it, he would know the same information that I know, and you would know the same information that I share with you guys. But you haven't studied it. You have taken time to learn other skills. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that we are behind each other. It just means our focus is different. So when our children, maybe adopted children, are coming in from another country where they have been focused more on survival, maybe Our autistic children are very hyper focused on something that's very interesting to them, and so they don't take the time to read. Maybe our children are distracted by their disabilities and they're trying to manage those disabilities, and until they have the skills they need to manage that and understand how to work through those problems, then they're not going to focus on learning to read because it's not pertinent to them right then. That doesn't mean they don't have the ability, though. That's a difference there. There are children who don't have the ability. There are adults who don't have the ability. And they are not going to catch up. But these children that we're talking about today do have the ability, they just don't have the focus on it. So the key isn't to get them to learn all the information as fast as they can, but first to figure out where their focus is and help them shift their focus when appropriate, but also help them to explore what they are interested in, just like we do as an adult. Let's see. So let's take a step back. Does your child truly lack the ability to obtain these new skills when they become needed? Time and time again, you hear about kids who are late readers and who understand. I myself didn't understand math until I really needed to when I started teaching it to my own kids. And before that, I had just struggled in that area. And again, you know, we hear about students who don't read until they're in 6th grade. And they turn out just fine. And the thing that happens is when that information becomes relevant to them, then they study it and they explode into it. And you don't have to struggle year after year after year like many parents do, just trying to learn a little bit more of the information and the child isn't retaining it because they have too many other things blocking their ability to learn. So rather than trying to follow the set scope and sequence that neurotypical children in a school setting have, we can let them get to the point when they're ready to learn that on their own. And when they're ready, they will explode into that skill. Or they may never fully explore that, and that's okay. My husband's strong suit is not writing. He isn't great at writing a sentence and creating the right punctuation. That's okay because he spends his entire day, like I said, calculating how to bend pipe and feed wire the right way and making sure that things fit together properly so that the building's lights work, you know? And that is important for him. So he spent a lot more time learning math. I don't remember algebra anymore. And that's okay because I never use it. And we aren't going to fully explore every idea, and we need to let go of that because as soon as we do, then we can allow our children to become experts in their area of interest and the areas that they're already naturally skilled in. So take a minute first and decide, is your child actually unable to retain this information and continue to catch up, quote unquote, with their peers? Or is their focus somewhere different? And if their focus is just a different subject, different skill set, then you can dive into that and incorporate those other tasks into what you're learning. And they will pick up those skills and they'll use them when they need them. Now, if something is impeding their ability, you need to take care of that first, like we talked about social skills. So again, it isn't bad to want your child to read and understand math, but first we need to figure out why it is they're not retaining the information, and adjust what we're doing to their needs and working with them rather than adjusting them to the curriculum. Oftentimes, we have the set of what a child needs to learn in first grade, second grade, third grade. And then if they don't learn all those things in that grade, then they're behind. And so we make them take on an extra workload, or we continue to push to learn the next page of information, and they don't actually retain what they're working on. Instead, if we take the time to observe what they're actually already doing and then start in that place and move up, they will slowly move into the type of work and information that you want to make sure they have to be successful as adults. All that being said, what are the things that we want to do to recognize their struggles and to recognize how to fix them? That's what you're here for, right? You want to learn how to fix the problem. There's a few things that you want to keep in mind, okay? Number one, you want to start, like I've already been saying, with what they're already currently showing that they're craving information in. If it's an ASD learner and they have a fixation on dinosaurs or monster trucks or making elaborate patterns, then you start with those individual things and you let them explore that and create a space where they can explore that, and then start incorporating those other skills you want them to learn into that space. Okay, so start with what they're currently needing to satisfy their interest in. Another way to consider that also is, again, if they are lacking problem-solving skills, if they're showing that they're not emotionally ready to take on a workload, then you need to address that first. And you need to take time to satisfy that need until they are able to go into situations where they can work through things without feeling overpressured. The second thing is to teach a simple lesson and take notes and observe. So if the child is frustrated, if the child is losing interest, if the child is not retaining information, then you need to ask yourself why. What step in this process is holding them back? And again, a lot of times with special needs learners, it's that they don't have the problem-solving skills to deal with a challenge of not knowing information. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to take care of, making sure they have those problem-solving skills to work through frustration that comes up when we're learning new information. The next thing that it might be is that they have not had enough time to practice previous skills, because again, so often we feel the need to push through the scope and sequences that are set out for what a first grader needs to learn, second grader on up, that we aren't checking for mastery. Just because a child can get an A on a test does not mean that they have retained the information long term. And we need to make sure that they're practicing these processes on a regular basis and in ways that are relevant to them so that they can retain that information. If a child is diagramming a sentence and they're not doing anything that has to do with sentence diagramming in their real life, then the next time you go back to that and try to expand on that, a lot of times it's not going to be relevant to them unless they happen to find that subject interesting. Which I do. I love that kind of stuff, and I really enjoyed that in school, but I know that most of my peers, especially the boys, didn't find it interesting or pertinent at all, and, in one ear and out the other, and they might be able to complete the work in class while we were learning it, but that doesn't mean they would know it the next day when we were supposed to expand on it. There's no point in moving forward if they haven't retained information. You need to stop and you need to take a look at what's going on and decide, is it because this isn't important? Is it truly not important? What value is your child going to have in understanding this information? And if you don't think they're going to have a value long term in their lives, you can make the decision to move beyond it. And instead of diagramming sentences, have conversations about what an adverb is. Play games that teach verbs, There was that ad for a long time. Do something and be. And the whole idea was verb. It was based on the word verb and teaching children to go out and do a verb because verbs are active. And, we as a nation have become less active. And so there was a whole series of commercials on that information for children. And how fun would it be just to say, okay, we're going to go spend our day doing verbs and find things to do and just practice it, and then they'll remember it. And they won't have to build a sentence to understand what they're doing. So consider if what they're doing is actually relevant to their lives and how you can make it more relevant. And then if it is something that they do need to know, how can you go through and reteach that skill? So an example would be if your child is struggling with carrying their tens, then they didn't have enough time learning that information, and they need to satisfy understanding carrying tens by itself, counting up to 10 and then moving that over into the tens column. They need to practice that before they can move on to that abstract skill. But you need to base that on what their level of learning is. So in a Montessori environment, in the 3 to 6 classroom, we're teaching children how to do this by starting with a spindle box that teaches the numbers 1 through 10, starting with number rods that have the numbers 1 through 10. And then once the children are solid on 1 through 10, we move on to teaching them with the golden bead material and creating 10 and moving that to a 10 bar, and creating 100 and moving those 10s into the 100 square. If your child already understands abstractly in their mind 0 through 10, then you don't have to go back through and teach that information. Where you want to start is where they are struggling with the abstraction of information. And if they're struggling with carrying the tens, then you want to provide material that's going to let them do that. There's so many materials available. My one caution to you is choose one and stick with it. If you want to choose just a tally system, writing tallies over and over and over again with a pen, then do that. If you want to use an abacus, which is great for the fine motor sensorial aspect of it, then choose that. But one of the big things that teachers are seeing right now in schools with the new Common Core program is there's so many different types of manipulatives being presented to children and not being mastered and not building on each other, that children are just getting confused and mixing them up and not understanding the process. So, if your child is struggling in areas, step back, provide a little more support with something, with some sort of manipulative or something that helps them concretely understand the information, and then move back to that abstraction where they do it on their own. Make sure though, when they're showing that they're ready through the simple lessons that we're going to talk about next, you move on to that abstraction, because if you keep them stuck on concrete and doing something in a concrete way for too long, then that will become habit. And then you'll see your child needing to count to 10 every time instead of naturally knowing how to move that over. So you want to think through that process and constantly be observing them, constantly seeing when they're ready. How can you tell when they're ready? Well, that's step number 3. So again, one of my favorite things that the Montessori philosophy really does is something called a 3-part lesson. A lot of teachers who use an emergent curriculum and teachers in public schools who are being told, to document children to help them bridge their gaps are being asked to observe the children and record information and use that documentation to help them determine what to do with the children. But the questions I constantly keep seeing are, what is it that you're supposed to do to document? And there's a lot of methods out there, a lot of charts out there for things to fill out and things to watch for. And those are really great. But the way to be able to see what each individual child is struggling with is by doing these simple lessons. First, you present the lesson and just let them watch, let them soak it in. Then the second time you do it together and you're checking to see if they retain the information. If they didn't retain the information, then they're not ready. And you either need to just put it aside for a little while and work on some other skills, some earlier skills, or something else completely different until they show interest. Or you need to go back to lesson 1 and just teach it. This is a big step that people miss a lot, is that we teach and then we expect them to instantly do it. And sometimes if they're ready, then they can make that leap. But if they're not making that leap consistently, then we need to slow down and just teach the information. Just show them, just model it for them. Okay? I mean, we think about when our children are babies and we're talking to them and we say the same words over and over and over again. And finally they say to us, Mom, or they sign to us, please, because we've been doing it over and over and over and over again for months. When we first start doing it, do we expect them to instantly say back to us, Mom, or to sign words to us? No, but we're building the blocks so that when they're ready, they've heard it so many times that they can jump right to it. And if they're not jumping to it, then that is your first sign that they're not ready. And you need to step back and just do that lesson over and over and over. And then when you go to the second lesson and you're doing it together and you're checking for retention by saying, what do I do next? What do I do with these ones? And then they say, oh, well, you put it up here. And you carry it. Then you know that they're ready. And then you can move on to step 3, which is them demonstrating it to you. Okay, so that middle step is so important to check for retention. And if they're not doing it, then you go back and you go back and you go back. And don't feel that you're not making progress, because it's not that your child is necessarily behind in some way. It's that this information is not pertinent to them yet, or there's something blocking them. And so you keep watching for what's blocking them. When you do that middle lesson and you're working together, what part of it is confusing to them? Take some time and look and see what is confusing them. Did they receive incorrect information before? Was it taught to them wrong and now you have to reteach it? Or were they not paying attention in the lesson and they just don't even remember what you talked about? Check and see what is causing them to be confused, and then use that information to go back and create new lessons on what they need to practice, like carrying tens and using an abacus to do it over and over and over again until it just becomes natural. Okay. The fourth thing is we want to teach learning based on the plane of development that our child is currently in. 3 to 6 plane of development is called, in the Montessori environment, the absorbent mind. 6 to 9, we move into abstraction, and 9 to 12 becomes more abstract. And the more that we move into those abstract phases, you're going to see your children not need to do as many of those remedial steps. And a lot of times people feel like they need to step all the way back and start with, like I said, those spindle boxes or counters that require a child to do each one at a time. But really, if your child is just struggling with understanding how to carry the ones into the tens, it might be better to start with something that actually has the ability to move over into tens. So like the golden bead material, or like an abacus where you count 10 on the bar and you can actually see that there's 10 there, or something that represents 10, some sort of a drawing or a block or base tens that represents the number 10. They don't necessarily need to start by counting each and every single thing and matching those to the numbers. That's too far back and that's too concrete. And if we stick them back into the concrete, we risk creating the habit of relying on always having to do something from a concrete perspective. As close to an abstract idea as we can get them, the easier it will be for them. Okay. So make sure that you are understanding their plane of development and basing your lessons off of that. Now, that's hard to do. That's not something that a curriculum is going to teach you. And that's something difficult that many homeschoolers struggle with, is not having that information at hand. So that's what I try to provide for you guys on my website and in my workshops, is exactly what information you need to know where they are developmentally, okay, where their abstraction ability is, okay, so that you can actually gear your lessons towards their level of development, not just what a curriculum says they should be learning at this age, because every child is different. And that's why the entire child-led learning philosophy is based off of observing children and providing work that's relevant to them. So, number 5, my final step that you want to follow when you are connecting your child's skills is making sure they have those problem-solving skills. Focus on teaching problem-solving skills. I guarantee you, as you begin observing your children and you see what it is that's not working in that second step, what they're not catching, is some sort of problem-solving skill. They're probably rushing through something, or they probably were not enjoying listening to you in the lesson because there's something shiny to look at instead. And so they didn't choose to concentrate, right? And not having those skills, it's what is actually preventing them from being successful. If you want them to be able to be successful, stop focusing on teaching the facts and pushing through the material and move back to what it is that they need to innately be able to do, whether they're doing schoolwork or chores or a job when they're an adult, or communicating with you about their wants and needs. When they have those skills set in stone, then they will be able to move in to focusing more on their work and actually following through. Okay? 9 times out of 10, the skill that you're going to find as you observe your children, the skill that's missing is not going to be an academic skill. It is going to be a problem-solving skill. And that's why I focus so much with my parents. When I talk to people, I can tell instantly. They'll say, well, we were working on math and he shut down. And as soon as we started working on this new skill that we've been working on, he wouldn't even try. He wouldn't even try. And I know he's good at math because, you know, he can put things together in 20 seconds flat, and he's constantly fidgeting with things and working with things, and he seems to understand how things go together. I know he has this type of mindset. So I don't know why he won't try. I don't know why this is scaring him. I don't know why this is frustrating for him. And we think it's because we're not teaching the material the right way, or we haven't found the right curriculum. But really, it's that he has some unresolved issues that need to be dealt with, okay? And we need to work through those skills first before we can see them jumping in to the lessons that we're providing them. And so, if you see that happening, then instead of going back and teaching something more concrete and moving back through that abstraction phase, you want to focus on problem solving skills. And the whole focus of all learning should be problem solving skills, because really school is just learning how to prepare for life. And naturally, children pick up reading. Naturally, children pick up the math skills that they need, even if you don't do any school at all. In fact, that's why there's entire groups of unschoolers whose children are very successful, because it's true. Children don't need our guidance for how to read and how to do math. As they need those skills, they are going to figure out ways to pick up that information. If they want to build something, they have to figure out how to measure everything out so that it's precise. And they will figure out their measuring skills. And you provide the tools with them. And then as they try to figure it out, you can provide lessons along the way that they will pay attention to. And those type of building projects will lead to them learning equations, because it's very time consuming and tedious to do the same measurements over and over again. Okay, and when they want to figure out how something works together, then they're going to need to do some physics, which is going to require an equation that has to do with measurements. Okay, if your child wants to write stories, if your child wants to research something that's very interesting to them, they're going to want to keep track of that information that they're researching and not just let it fly away. So how are they going to do that? They're going to need to figure out some documenting skills. They need to figure out some ways of organizing their thoughts in a writing pattern. Okay? And that's when you want to teach them, okay, so in a sentence, we have a subject and an object. And we want to make sure that we have both of those things, because then the sentence makes sense and we understand how this has to do with that. And it's organized, okay? they will learn those skills even if you never open up a textbook, because they are going to need them. But they are not going to learn problem-solving skills unless we make them a priority. If we leave them at that phase of toddlerhood where they throw a fit to get information across, then that's the only thing they're going to learn. But when they show you that they're ready to learn more problem-solving skills by trying to communicate deeper information to you, then you take the time to teach that lesson. Just like when your child has a building project and they want to learn how to measure something, you teach them the skills they need to measure. So often, once our children are speaking, we think that teaching communication is over. And whether it's subconsciously or consciously, we stop consistently telling them better ways, because now they know how to talk, so they should know the better ways. But they are still using what they were doing in the last plane of development until you teach them new methods. So if you can teach them those problem-solving skills, then you're going to see their reading skills and their math skills develop much more deeply. All that being said, I have programs coming up this fall to teach more about problem-solving skills. I already have released my free 21 Days to a Thriving Homeschool Challenge, which hugely focuses on teaching problem-solving skills. I have YouTube videos coming up for teaching problem-solving skills. We're going to go crazy with problem-solving skills, and if that's what your child is struggling with, then you can focus in on that, okay? But if your child is actually struggling with being able to understand information that you're providing for them in their current mindset at their age level, then you need to consider, are you going back and being too remedial? So this month, I'm going to focus with you guys and give you a blog post on reading and a blog post on math to give you specific information about what your child is capable of doing at certain age levels from an abstraction point of view. So that if there's a concept that they're missing along the way, if there's just a piece of information they don't understand, you don't have to go all the way back to first grade level to teach them that piece of information. You can just fit right in there with their age level at their competency level. Think about it like this, okay? If you want to start a Twitter account, maybe you've had Facebook forever, you don't see a point in Twitter, but you know, you need it for work, or you just want to get more connected. You've heard about Periscope maybe, and you want to have a Periscope account, but you have to have Twitter first, right? I talk constantly about using social media as an example because it's something constantly changing in our lives, and that we're always needing to teach ourselves to stay current in our international world. So you don't have a Twitter account. When I find out you don't have a Twitter account and you want a Twitter account, and you say, how do I get a Twitter account? I'm not going to go back and teach you how to set up an email address and how to learn to type first. I'm just going to say, let me show you Twitter's website. If you click this sign up button, you can easily sign up. Remember how you signed up for Facebook? It's the same concept. You just do it here on this platform instead. I'm not going to go back and reteach you a bunch of information you already know abstractly somewhere in your head about how signing up for websites work. I'm going to assume you're not asking me how signing up for websites work. You're asking me, what's the link to Twitter? Where do I go to do this? Okay. And that's the difference, that a lot of times we think we have to go all the way back to the beginning. But really, there's just that link there in the middle that they need. And we can teach it to them right there on their level. We don't need to go back to the beginning to do that. Okay? So, we're going to talk more about that on the blog this week. I hope that this information has been useful for you, and just stay tuned for what's coming up for the rest of the month. And my workshops coming up this summer or this fall that are going to be teaching those concepts and teaching especially problem solving skills. I will end this now and see how it turns out without any video. Thank you guys for tuning in.